Okay, so I'm under the Eclipse in my shop, and these are the clamp cylinders that run the clamps. The other one's right there. The valve that runs the clamps is this valve right here, and this is the cutting head valve. Alright, so common problem is you get air leaking out of this muffler, or this muffler gets plugged. So it's a good idea to change these from time to time. But when they're plugged and dirty, now that happens mostly if you have a quiet compressor, because a little oil from the compressor gets exhausted out of here, and then that collects dust and dirt. Now, if you have air leaking out of this when you're turning your clamps on, or when you're turning your cutting head on, that means it could mean a couple of things. It could mean that the valve is stuck and it can't shift properly inside. If that's the case, as a temporary fix, you can take these air lines out and you can drop 1, 2, that's about it, the drops of air tool oil into each fitting, and then put the air line back in. Same thing down here. Obviously you can't put the air tool oil into the fitting, but you can drop it into the air hose and then plug it back in, and when you turn the air on, air will push the lubricant up into the valve. Now that's a temporary fix. That's when you're having these problems, that tells you you're gonna need a new part, either a valve or an air cylinder. So we're gonna first, from a troubleshooting standpoint, we're gonna put a drop of air tool oil in, and we're gonna exercise it, and we're gonna see if the problem goes away. If the problem doesn't go away, especially on the clamps, we're gonna have to check the air cylinder itself. Now, in this circuit, I have 2 colors of hose. You may only have black. The clear hose in my case has no pressure in it by default. The black hose has air pressure in it if the air is turned on. So you can see how the clear hoses are connected to the tops of all the air cylinders, and the blacks to the bottom, because by default we want the clamps up. Alright, to test the air cylinders, we're going to need a couple lengths of hose, 1/4 inch tubing. You can get it at Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace, True Value, or your local hardware store. Now you're also going to need a little piece of hose like this, with a 5mm screw screwed into the end of it to act as a plug, so we can isolate each cylinder as we go down the line. I've made 2. Alright, now first thing you got to do is turn your air off, and then you got to get under your machine, which is not fun on a 32x40. Okay, to take the air hose out, you push the air hose down, you hold the ring against the fitting, and then you pull the line out. It takes 2 hands. I can't do it with 1 hand. So you push down, hold this ring against the fitting, pull the hose out. Alright, so I'm going to do that. I'll be right back. Okay, so make sure you have the air off when you're doing that. So now I'm going to take my length of hose and I'm going to plug it in, just push down and then pull up, and that's how you get the air hose in there. And push down, pull up. Alright, so now let's go put it onto the last air cylinder in the circuit. See, that's the first, second, third, and last air cylinder. The last air cylinder has an elbow, the other cylinders have T's. So I'm gonna hook this cylinder up. I'll be right back. Okay, so now I've got my spare tubing all hooked up. I've got these tubes that were originally there all disconnected, and I've got my hoses connected to my valve. Now I can turn my air on. Okay, the air's on. Now if you'll notice, there's a little white hole right here. This is the manual override. So if you take a little Allen wrench and you stick it in that hole and you push, you heard it run this air cylinder. So it's running just this one cylinder. You can see it going up and down. Okay. So we're not getting any leaking here. So that cylinder is okay. So we'll attach the next cylinder on, or test the next cylinder by itself. I'll turn the air off and connect it up. Okay, so now I've just got this air cylinder isolated. So I've got all the air hoses disconnected from this cylinder. I've put these two air hoses back on to this cylinder. I've put my makeshift plugs in there. Mine has a little leak, so that's okay for testing. And I've got my hoses hooked up. So let's run this one. Okay, no air is leaking out of here, so that air cylinder is good. So you repeat this process on every one of the other air cylinders. I'll also show you an alternate in just a minute so you don't have to use the plugs. Be right back. Okay, so in this case, I have the end cylinder connected to the next cylinder in line. I've disconnected that from the rest of the circuit, and I've put my hoses on. So now when I run it, I'm going to run the two cylinders together. Now, if I tested that one and I had no leakage, and I added this one into the circuit and then I have leakage, well, that means that air cylinder is bad, right? Okay, so this is a way to do it without the plug. So now I'm going to test it over here. So now I'll push this little guy in. Okay, so I've got no leakage here, so my air cylinder is good. Sorry about that light in the background. So I just repeat that process by adding each additional air cylinder into the circuit for testing. So one last thing to note, you'll notice that I've got a bolt right here and here, not an air cylinder. If you have an older machine, you may have 4 air cylinders here. It really doesn't need 4 air cylinders. So if you have a bad cylinder, typically this one, because this is at the end of the line and it collects all the water that got in your air system and it corrodes the inside of the cylinder, you can take an air cylinder off and move it to another location. You only need 2 air cylinders per clamp. On the vertical clamp, I've taken out the middle air cylinder. Okay, that's it about clamps.